Very excited for this panel. I think it's very timely. And actually, even listening to some of what Peter was just sharing, I think we can really build upon some of what has already been shared with you. So with that, let me introduce our esteemed panel, starting with Peter Gillis, who will be back to join us. Probably needs no introduction because you did just hear from him. Innovation team leader and senior researcher. Peter, happy to have you as part of the panel now.
Thank you, Sarah.
We also have Nigel Paine, who is joining us. Nigel is co-presenter of Learning Now and the ex-CLO of the BBC. I'm a big BBC fan, so awesome to have you here, Nigel.
Thank you, Sarah.
We have Sharon Kaliouby, who is the VP of Strategic Alliances at the Learning Pool. Sharon, thank you for joining us as well.
Hey, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the earlier sessions. This has been great. I've been taking notes on all of yours, so I'm really excited to be able to follow up on some of the topics Nigel and Peter have just discussed.
See that? Lifelong learner. I love it, Sharon. And finally, we have Dr. Nafu, who is the Trinity College Dublin Associate Professor in Human Resource Management. Welcome to the panel as well. Awesome. So I'm going to kick us off because we only have a short amount of time for this topic, and it's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So I thought what we could do, just to kind of break the ice a bit, is get a sense from all of you in really thinking about how learning needs to be redefined to attract talent and skills. And each of you comes from a bit of a diverse background, what you've done in the past, your current role. So maybe you can think a little bit about what that question really means to you in the work that you're doing today. Dr. Fu, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Great to be the first person to answer that question. So let me talk a little bit of my background. So I'm an academic working in Trinity. I have been doing research, teaching, and practice on people management related topics, where this learning, talent, skills are the key. When you ask me how this learning should be redefined, so based on my experience as teaching, as well as I also serve on the Grad Ireland CIPD for the best learning programs. So based on that experience, I would like to share 3 things that really maybe some things already been done, in organizations. So the first, all the learners I have access to, from undergraduates, postgraduates, PhD students, or executives, is that they want to have this opportunity to learn. As you talk about the life learner, is that no matter where they are, which stage they are at, they want to learn, always have that opportunity to learn. So it's not about a career stage. So from beginning to the middle to the advanced, they always seek that as environment, opportunity to learn as a priority. The second point I want to make is about the flexible learning. I think, this is no surprise. People want to learn anytime and anywhere. Okay. The third point I would like to touch is that I think Peter talked about is about the social elements of learning. What I have seen that, in a classroom setting, people come together and discuss, debate. So that always generates better conversations, better, more creative solutions. So this is a social learning together. And this, I think this is not that surprising. But what I want to say the next, based on my experience with my college students, and you would say, the future generations, they live in the technology world, let's say Snapchat or other social media. What I noticed that is that even they have a presentation in the classroom, they have delivered great consultancy projects. They want to show that. They want to show their learning skills and to other people. I think this is a challenge for organizations. So, okay, how could I have that everybody to have their skills, on the board or anything? And this is a challenge, but also I think it's great opportunities for organizations, because from HR perspective, if organizations have a new strategy, new product, and they need new skill sets, and for HR currently there's no kind of a database to include all the skill sets. So you see the gap People want to show the skills they have, and the HR lacks that skills. When an organization needs the skills, the challenge for HR is where do I get those people? New hires? But actually, internally, I think organizations should have a platform for people to have that skills, kind of not to show off, but to accumulate that their skills are being recognized, being valued. So those are the three changes, I think, to redefine the learning I want to mention.
Yeah. And maybe we can try to make those platforms as cool and snappy as Snapchat or WhatsApp or some of these other ones that a lot of folks like. Peter, how about for you? How is learning being redefined?
Yeah, I think, Sarah, as you say, I mean, we have very different perspectives, which is excellent here on this panel. I suppose as a research center, we see a lot of this coming in the door, shall we say, that in our members who are coming to us. And if I define learning, it's this idea of the gap. Okay, so the gap between basically what's coming out of the universities and the colleges and what's required in the workplace, and it actually seems to be at an all-time high. We have seen initiatives like Ernst & Young saying that they no longer actually require a base level degree to bring people in for the skills they want. Now, again, I don't necessarily believe in that attitude either, because you end up with people who are capable of doing the Ernst & Young tasks, but are maybe missing on that broader skill set. So it's a complicated one, but it's one that actually we have about 3 projects kind of starting to look in this area, and I think it's something that will definitely need to be addressed very quickly, because I think organizations on one hand are starting to believe, like that Ernst & Young example, that they're better off trying to do it themselves, and universities, I think, and again, these gaps are in that area of digital skills, transversal skills, and data skills, and they seem to be the 3 that are emerging as sitting firmly in this gap. So I think,
and Peter, I think that's a fabulous point. I know from where I sit at a corporation, we struggle with that as well, right? What is the right partnership between us and the educational establishment, the universities, so that we're informing them of some of those skills, behaviors that we need, and the people that they are going to push out into the market. Because I've had that same debate around, wait, what is my role? What is the corporation's role versus what is the university's role? And can we be better partners and work more collaboratively to co-create what that whole experience looks like versus thinking it's you or it's me? So I think
and just very briefly to say on that, because we really want to make sure we don't lose out on that other aspect of higher education or college education, which is the development of the individual. So, we can't lose that. Yeah. Sorry.
Absolutely. Nigel, how about for you?
I'll be very brief and just share with you 3 words which I think are really important. The first word is learning as enablement. I mean, if you start focusing on enablement, about what you can do as opposed to learning, which is the process that you go through, I think that increases interest, motivation, and centrality. So the first word is enablement. The second word is curiosity. That an organization full of curious people is an organization that's got much more chance of survival and success than an organization where everyone just takes everything straight on the chin. So you need enablement, curiosity, and the third word is exploration. That most organizations are pretty good at exploitation. They know how to, in a sense, milk their assets. They know how to make good money from doing the same thing again and again and meeting customer needs and getting products out of the door or services out of the door. What they're less good at is exploration, which is finding the next generation of products, ideas, and services. So if you can incorporate learning, which is about enablement, curiosity, and exploration, who wouldn't want to go there? I think people would be beating a path to your door if you can frame it like that. So rather than something that you have to do, it's a process of being alive and living and doing really exciting things. Simple as that.
I love that. as the mother of 8-year-old twins, the questions and the curiosity sometimes gets me bogged down, and I'm like, just no more questions. No, it is what it is. But it's almost like we beat that out of people by the time they get to university, and then by the time they get to our companies. And we need to bring that back, because I think you're exactly right. It's that inquisitive nature, that line of questioning, that then helps lead to these conversations that lead to some of the breakthrough ideas. So I like those three, Nigel, very helpful. And Sharon, why don't you round us out? How about for you? How does learning need to be redefined?
You know, it's really funny because Nigel and I work together. He's mentored me. He's guided me. So funny enough, I'm starting with 3 words too. None of you, Nigel. But it goes, here's what has never changed is we need to engage, educate, and empower. I am going to steal some of your 3 words. I like the enablement and the exploration. However, what has really shifted and where we're redesigning is the value of culture, well-being, and equity, and all in learning. And you mentioned it, Nigel, in yours, spaces to safe spaces. That has never been more important than it is today, for many, many reasons. We really see the importance of the learning experience and measuring those behaviors. And then really, you mentioned this, Peter, is that self-directedness. We're evolving self-directed learning into self-determined learning, which we talk about as pedagogy. This is really where it's going to evolve. And senior C-suite executives need to know learning is going to happen. It's whether or not it happens to them or they help guide it and they allow the organization to be the learning organization, which both Peter and Nigel mentioned earlier. So yeah, I'm real excited to see how we redefine it, because we have this great opportunity right now.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. And it makes me think about before the crisis or before the pandemic, we had been doing a lot of work around, the future of skills. How is technology going to disrupt the work that our people do? What skills, would they need? And then the pandemic happened. And what was interesting was then the conversation shifted, and it wasn't about how technology was going to disrupt what they were doing, but it was, how do we leverage technology to help them how they're doing their work? Because we couldn't, be in offices anymore, and we had to shift that overnight. And I think we had spent so much time before that thinking about it in a different way. And when you actually think about actually learning as enablement, right, Nigel, going back to your comment earlier, you can kind of change the frame. And we saw how important learning was even in the midst of a disaster or a crisis like we were in. So maybe keeping on this theme and thinking about, the past 18 months, 2 years, what we've all been through. How do you think talent and skills issues have been impacted by this need to deal with all this disruption, by the pandemic, by the crisis? How has that changed how we're looking at talent and skills? And Nigel, why don't we go back and start with you?
Sure. The idea that talent and skills has been untouched in the midst of everything falling around our ankles would be a very big irony. I think the whole point really is that as organizations have tried to pivot, they've realized that they need people who can pivot. They need agile people who can think on their feet. They need generative skills, so that the skills that build other skills, as well as specific skills and ability to do a job. So I think that what we're seeing is a complete redefinition of how organizations view their staff and how staff view their organizations. And in the US, as Sharon knows well, there's something called the Great Resignation. And it is a thing. It is a thing. There are 4 million people who have quit their jobs in the US, good jobs, in the last few months. And they've quit their jobs because their sense of their talent and skills didn't seem to match the organization's sense of their talent and skills, or they put themselves out during the pandemic. They become completely different people, demonstrating different abilities. And then things started to go back to normal, and they were put back in a box, and they didn't want to go back in the box. So they left without jobs. And it's such a volatile jobs market in the US at the moment. It's extraordinary. Jobs are bubbling up all over the place. People are being approached that would never have dreamt of leaving, and there are people actively out there seeking jobs. So it's like a redefinition of the place of talent and skills in organizations. And those organizations that recognize that they're going to have to handle people differently are going to do much better than those that say, here's your job description, go away and do it. So it's all about flexibility, engagement, and growth. All of those things come to the fore. And it's fascinating. We're watching the world change in front of our eyes. And yet there are some people who think that that was just a temporary hiccup. It's reality now. It's not going to change.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I'm sitting in the U.S. now, so certainly that is definitely something that we're seeing. You know, every day in the news, there's more and more numbers that come out depicting the situation, exactly what you're talking about, Nigel. And I think we've kind of shifted from organizations saying, hey, for you to get promoted, you're going to have to prove to me you have these skills and you can do this type of work and you have these experiences, to people saying, hey, company, I expect you to continue developing me, or I'm going to go somewhere else because that's not aligned with who I am. And I want to be recognized and rewarded for what I can do and what I want to do in the future. Sharon, let me get you to opine on that as well.
Yeah, we also have to acknowledge there's the she session that has happened in North America. So as we're saying, like, oh, there's bubbling jobs everywhere, we're still dealing with a lack of equity in regard to the gender and the ethnic minorities actually taking a brunt of this. So although many have resigned, yes, it's really going to become an employees market. We also have to look and see how can we support those that couldn't do the juggle. I've spoken to more women that have decided to leave the workforce because nobody was around to help support kids. And our education, I mean, you just said you had 2 twin 8-year-olds, God bless. I mean, I don't know how you juggled, right? But I had college kids, and even that's been the juggle of a nightmare, noting that they're going to be much more demanding. We need to have learning that isn't just the replication of standing in front of a Zoom call and saying that's really what we need. As Nigel mentioned earlier, that connection, that human connection needs to be there, however we deploy it. Just as was mentioned earlier as well by the doctors, it's saying that we need to make sure we utilize social media and things like that. Whether or not we make it entertaining, I don't think that matters. We need to make it relevant. We need to build skills and the experiences that they need. And we need to really target the populations most in need. And we have to figure out, why did we get 800,000 women with the she session versus 210,000 men? And then why are men getting promoted as women are not? So although there's great energy and activity, and I agree with everything Nigel said, we need to be deliberate in how we upskill and what we're doing. Because if we don't, I think the Gen Zs coming in are going to kick our butts and kick everybody in that C-suite's butt, because I don't know if they won't work. God, I hope they do, because I have daughters that need to make salaries, but they're going to be that much more demanding and less tolerant. We've done hybrid events where we've actually, and Nigel's led a number of them, where we're engaging with people and we're hearing the outcry and the fact that people want it and need it to be that much better.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. And I'd love Dr. Fu and Peter to share with us some thoughts that you have on this diversity, equity, and inclusion angle, and how learning can be a catalyst for that. Because I think sometimes we separate them out as separate things. And I'm curious on your thoughts on how we can think about learning in relation exactly to what Sharon was saying. How do you use it actually to enable what you want to do from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective? Peter, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an area again that we have seen come up again and again in terms of, technology is supposed to be this great leveler and provide access to wider cohorts to education. And we could even see that the MOOCs possibly were sort of a first roll of the dice down that road. What we are, of course, seeing is that, connectivity, interactivity, technology is just not the same. So there are sort of, we'll say, infrastructural and hardware challenges, I think, to that realistically have not been addressed at this stage and tend to be an ongoing aspect and very hard nut to crack. We've seen some work you know, in remote locations where we see this nearly school in a box kind of scenario where everything that you need to educate is just in a very robust box, and obviously that's a move towards it. But like, it is a huge challenge, and I would be the first to say it's one we haven't done brilliantly at yet, in my mind.
Dr. Fu, what do you think about that topic?
I think from my own research and my teaching, let's say, you know, we talk about HR as a system rather than just you know, singular practice. You know, you have a training, development, learning, or you have a, you know, D&I, you know, in another office, like per se. It's not like that. You know, from the top level, I think that, you know, the strategic, what are key issues for business? I think the business is all about people. Okay, so whether you design learning, whether you design your EDI strategy, whether you design any other practices, I think it's the people, you know, what they need. I do a little bit of work on the future work. You know, I talk to CIPD, I talk to my students and other podcasts. So my sense of the future work is not a place, it's not a technology, it's actually, you know, it's a people's experience. You know, I think Sharon talks about this. You know, there few. You know, I think there's some comments from the audience saying, "How do you define learning?" For me, learning is that I learn a little bit. I learn every day. You go to a place where you feel you learn every day because you feel that a sense of belonging. You feel that you are valued. You know, that's all kind of a. It's not just say I learn ABC today. It's not like that. So I think the future work is all about people's experience. Like Nigel and Sharon and Peter, they talk about this meaningful. I think the future work is safe, flexible, collaborative, and meaningful. Safety, no, you know, no surprise because we're leaving the COVID. But psychological safety is another thing that, you know, like the future generation, they come in, they wouldn't listen. You know, they want to voice up and they want to have a safe place to speak up. In terms of flexible, I think Nigel talk about agile. So, you know, I think organizations should have this experimental mindset. We try something, if it doesn't work, we try something else. But if you look at the traditional organizations, they want to, you know, spend a lot of time to make the policy and then implement the policy. But designing the policy, implement policy takes time. But the future should be agile. You know, when people have these needs and we have this change. So this is agility is quite necessary. The collaborative nature, why people not working from home, why people have to come to office. This is, you want to go there and have a social interactions. You want to have intellectual stimulation. So this future work should be collaborative for creative. The last thing is really about the meaningful. I think Nigel mentioned that, oh, people after COVID, people had 2 years to think about why they need to go to work, why they work, and, you know, what I'm doing here today. So I think the meaningfulness is that really everything, you know, why we are here is not just what work you do. I think the work you do, does that help others? Does that help, you know, the society? And also, I think the future generation society is already have this climate change and sustainability put it on the top of their agenda, even before go to the job market. So this is the people we're going to work with in the next few years. And I think, so this is it's not only about training, it's not about learning, it's not about the talent, the skill side. It's really by the end of the day, we are all human beings. Why are we here? That's the key question.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, bringing it back to the future of work, which I think there's obviously a lot of discussion about. And I think learning and talent and skills plays prominently in all of those conversations as well. So I'm gonna, we have a few minutes left, and I actually have one question I want everyone to give us a sense of, because I actually think this might be one of the most useful questions for those in our audience. And obviously throughout this time, organizations are also being disrupted and revenues are being impacted across the board. Organizations are having to reprioritize what they do, how they use their investment. Different groups may be fighting for a limited amount of investment. So the question is, what advice would you give a CEO when they're being pressured by their CFO to either cut funding or not give incremental funding for learning? because there's just not enough to go around. So really, what is the business case for learning in today's dynamic environment? Peter, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, Sarah. I mean, a recent project that is still ongoing, that we did in Learnovate and produced a model called PEAS, which is Plan, Explore, Analyze, and Share, is around basically L&D exposing the value financially of what it is they do. And it's about understanding at the very beginning, when somebody comes and asks L&D to do something, probing them with something like Simon Sinek's 5 whys to get to why, and get back to the real reason that this should be done in the first place. That might do a few things. First, it might stop them doing things that possibly L&D shouldn't be trying to solve in the first place. But secondly, it also gives this support mechanism to elevate this. And we did this research with live active companies, and in a short sandbox over the summer actually of the pandemic, we worked with 2 companies on 2 small enough projects, and we were able to help them in that sandbox activity to show they were delivering 2 million in value to their company, through those learning activities. Plus, one of them went off and made up their own sum and showed that they were saving 38 tons of carbon. So, and with sustainability so high on the agenda. So I think I've said this for a long time, that, I think the human aspect of all organizations is just so important now, that if L&D don't stand up to it, they'll be replaced by something called something else. Because I think, supporting and developing our human capital is just so important. So I think my answer should be, realistically, they need to be working hard and developing out these methodologies of explaining, showing with euro or dollar signs what the value is they're bringing, and then that conversation doesn't come up, I think.
Great. Nigel, how about for you?
I've done it many times. Been dragged in to see the CEO to persuade him or her not to shut down the learning function or to invest in a program or project. And I have a very simple rule of thumb. I ask CEOs what their vision for the company is, where they want it to go. And when they talk expansively about the direction of the company, I pick out every single element and say, how do you do that without learning? How do you do that without new capability? How do you do that without broader vision? How do you do that without engaged and motivated staff? How do you do that with half of your talent walking out of the door because you're not prepared to show any kind of credible investment in them? And at the end of that conversation, there's usually a pause. And I think my point has been made that a CFO has a perfectly legitimate frame on the world, the financial frame on the world. But increasingly, I want learning people to see that they have a legitimate frame, a legitimate way of looking at the world, and they should be courageous and positive about that. No CFO has ever stood falteringly at the door of the CEOs and say, "Oh, should I really talk about this stuff? Will the CEO?" They just go straight in and say, "You've got to save this money. If you do this, this is going to be the financial consequence." Learning people have to go in and say, "If you do this, this will be the economic consequence to your organization by not understanding the way your organization has to change and evolve." So I think you can be very, very firm, positive, and aggressive about the value of learning in the world to come. And any CEO who really doesn't get that probably doesn't deserve to be a CEO, or will not be a CEO for very long. So I think it's that serious and that big.
I like that. We always think about the risk of doing something, not always the risk of not doing. So I like that frame. Sharon, how about you?
In the same theme and light and it's usually, it's the CLO that goes to the CEO or some person that's been put there. So hopefully they've got the value of learning there. But what is the cost of not educating your workforce? That is the number one way I would go in. And also I would say, reach out. Vendors like ours, Learning Pool has all these corporate social responsibility online programs that they embed for no cost. This is the world today. So I would say partner up with the thought leaders, the vendors, the people that you know, and even those that you don't. If you're looking at this, the Learnovate Center, reach out to them. Somebody is going to talk to you regardless. This is not like, people are not going to push you away and say, it's not all about the dollar sign. Also, in this world with compliance and mandated training that's now becoming even more important, and it could not be even more worse, I've written about that, is start measuring the behavior and the experiences of your population so that you're coming back with an answer that the CEO understands, and do it analytically. Use the databases of a Learning Locker or LRS, and if you don't know what they mean, you're not behind the times. It just means you haven't had the budget to understand what these platforms are. But reach out to anyone here or anyone in the industry you trust and find out, how do I communicate to the CEO? They understand analytics. They understand what it's going to cost them if they don't do it. And they'll understand it once you partner up and not put the dollar signs as, we need X number of dollars to get this course in or these programs. No, tell them how you're going to impact the culture, the well-being, and the equity of the company. That's been my big light bulb the past year, is those 3 areas that really feed into the success of the hybrid world.
Yeah, that's great advice. Leverage this ecosystem, right? You guys are meeting some people here today. There's a lot of different institutions out there that can help. Dr. Fu, last words. Any closing thoughts from you on that topic?
Thank you, Sarah. I think we're going to have the greatest consistency in this answer to all of the CEOs. And I think as I created, established, and was director for the MSc Human Resource Management at Trinity Business School, is very, probably one of the best. So where, which I teach my students, to have the strategic thinking, to have these connections with other departments. So that means when the other departments, post something like this, HR department is the victim of the learning department. So I would say to the CEO that when other departments, doing some, any relevant to other department, you have to listen to them, right? So the CHRO has to come in, particularly given the whole pandemic. CHRO, being on the board and leads a lot of changes. And I share with HR professionals, try your best, stay in the party. So I think this is something really important. As all of the panelists talked about, we have research-informed, evidence-based, and impact-driven program, in the HR program. Where we mean that you need to show the evidence. I think Peter talked about the evidence, the numbers. Nigel and Sharon also talk about you need to show the value. So we, in my course, that we have a people analytics course, basically, show people how to calculate and how to do the hypothesis modeling, and show the evidence, the impact people are making, and also train people the storytelling skills. So if the HR department currently still focus on the traditional HR, I think it's a time to shift to have this analytical approach. It's not about numbers, because in my research we showed that analytic skills is not the key to success. It's the storytelling capabilities, how to convince people and how to show the impact that training, learning, some programs are having impact on the whole business. I think this is going to be huge. But I love
that. The evidence.
Sarah, could
right? Even an organization like ours, we have a lot of people who rely on data. So coming in with that evidence, I think, makes it very compelling.
Yeah.
Just one final comment on that one, Sarah, is that during that research, we came across one large organization who had achieved this kind of level within his organization. And ironically, across the product directors that there were 6 of them in this organization, he became the one that first got called when there was a strategic issue to be addressed, because he kind of spanned the whole lot. Now, this is the guy who had achieved the nirvana, but he was seen as it's going to be a problem that people solve. Therefore, let's call him in and see what he might do about it. So I think that's probably where we'd love to get to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I feel like we could have talked about this all day. I think there's a lot of energy around this topic of redefining learning and just seeing how integral it is to everything we do, not just what's happened through the pandemic, but as we talk about things like the future of work. So thank you to Peter, Nigel, Dr. Fu, and Sharon.